Top 1. The Babylonian Stargate. We begin our journey into the forgotten precision of the past with two remarkable discoveries from the cradle of civilization. The Babylonian Stargate. In 1894, during excavations near the ancient city of Sippar in modern-day Iraq, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a collapsed structure believed to have functioned as an astronomical observation site. Beneath layers of hardened clay and broken stone instruments lay a circular bronze object unlike anything previously documented from Mesopotamia. The disc was carefully engraved with concentric rings and hundreds of minute markings along its edge. Each incision was uniform in depth and spacing, suggesting deliberate and methodical craftsmanship rather than decorative intent. When the artifact was examined in detail, researchers discovered that the outer ring divided a full circle into 360 primary units, with secondary divisions reaching below 1/5 of a degree. Subsequent reconstruction showed that the maximum deviation in angular measurement was less than 0.2 degrees. This level of precision approaches that of modern astronomical calculation tools. Yet the object predates optical lenses, telescopes, and mechanical gearing by many centuries. Metallurgical analysis dated the bronze alloy to the Neo-Babylonian period around the 6th century BCE. What puzzled scientists was not the composition itself, but its surface stability. The disc showed minimal corrosion despite centuries underground, indicating an intentional treatment process that remains poorly understood. Surrounding the object were fragments of cuneiform tablets recording detailed observations of planetary motion. Jupiter and Saturn were identified by their traditional Babylonian names, while Venus was described through its changing position at dawn and dusk. One tablet described a procedure in which the observer was instructed to rotate the disk by a fixed number of markings when Venus appeared at a specific altitude above the horizon. The text then predicted the delayed appearance of a red wandering star in the southern sky. When compared with modern astronomical simulations, the described sequence matched known retrograde motion patterns. This suggests that the disk was not symbolic, but operational. It functioned as a calibrated instrument capable of tracking predictable celestial cycles. Physical wear patterns on the disk indicate the presence of a rotating arm or pointer, now missing, which would have allowed the user to align the markings with observed star positions. The layout implies a system designed for repeated use over long periods, possibly generations. This was not casual observation. It was structured measurement based on accumulated data. After its transfer to a European collection for study, references to the artifact gradually disappeared from published catalogs. Early photographs listed in museum inventories were later removed without explanation. Some associated tablets were reported lost during periods of conflict, though no detailed loss records were released. Today, the original disc is rarely mentioned in academic literature, and access to the Sippar excavation zone remains heavily restricted. If this instrument functioned as evidence suggests, it challenges the assumption that ancient astronomy relied solely on naked eye estimation. It raises the possibility that Babylonian scholars operated within a sophisticated mathematical framework capable of achieving repeatable accuracy. Whether this knowledge developed independently or was inherited from an even earlier tradition remains unresolved. What is clear is that the precision embedded in this object exceeds what history has long allowed these civilizations to possess. This was not legend or religious symbolism. It was a measuring device, and its disappearance from the record leaves a gap that modern explanations still fail to fill. Top 2. The Egyptian Lunar Obelisk. In 1932, during a British archaeological survey in the necropolis of Saqqara, researchers excavated a solitary obelisk buried near the ruins of an ancient temple aligned with the moon rather than the sun. Unlike the monumental obelisks of Luxor or Karnak, this pillar stood barely 3 meter high, carved from a single piece of black diorite. What captured the team's attention was not its modest size, but the strange series of incisions along its edges. Dozens of horizontal notches ran from base to peak in intervals too subtle to be decorative. When sunlight passed through the narrow corridor leading to the obelisk, shadows would crawl upward along the stone surface, aligning precisely with the etched grooves. But these shadows did not correspond to solar cycles. They matched the phases of the moon. A later study by physicist Gerald K. Watson confirmed that the shadow intervals on the obelisk represented synodic lunar months with uncanny accuracy. When plotted against modern lunar calendars, the device's readings displayed an average deviation of less than 10 seconds per full cycle. Even more puzzling, the obelisk accounted for the slight irregularity in the moon's orbital speed, known today as lunar apogee and perigee variation. The notches subtly narrowed and widened to accommodate this fluctuation. Such knowledge was presumed to have been discovered only in the early modern era with telescopic observation and centuries of recorded data. Inscriptions at the base of the pillar were sparse. A single glyph sequence repeated 4 times read, "The eye that marks the breath of night." No royal names, no offerings, no myths, just that cryptic phrase. Scholars propose that the obelisk was part of a priestly tool set used to predict lunar eclipses and coordinate temple rituals tied to the lunar calendar. The diorite surface had been polished to near mirror smoothness on one side, and thermal analysis indicated its temperature dropped faster than surrounding stones after sunset. This thermal change may have affected shadow clarity, creating an even more precise visual marker under moonlight. In the years following the initial discovery, the obelisk was removed and relocated to a private collection for preservation, reportedly at the request of Egyptian antiquities officials concerned about theft. However, documentation of its measurements and shadow studies vanished from public records by the 1950s. The Watson papers, once scheduled for publication through the British Academy, were never released. Requests to re-examine the object have been denied, citing lack of sufficient documentation proving its significance. The original excavation trench has since been filled and paved over as part of a broader restoration plan. If this obelisk was indeed a functioning lunar tracker with second-level precision, it dismantles the long-held belief that ancient Egyptian astronomy was strictly solar in orientation. It suggests a dual calendar system operating in full harmony, not through superstition or symbolism, but through rigorous measurement. Who built it remains unknown. No temple records mention such a device. No comparable structures have been found elsewhere. Yet its silence still speaks. Carved in stone was a logic older than our clocks, and the hands that placed it knew how to measure time, not only by the light of day, but by the breath of night. Top 3, the Chinese south-pointing disk. Moving further east and then to the Mediterranean, we find evidence of advanced navigation and physics that challenge our timeline. The Chinese south-pointing disk. In 1956, while excavating a Han Dynasty shipwreck buried under silt near the Yangtze River Delta, a team of Chinese maritime archaeologists recovered a corroded bronze disc locked within a sealed lacquered chest. The object, roughly the size of a human palm, bore no ornamental features or calligraphy. At its center was a small pivot point with the remains of a needle-shaped pointer fused by oxidation. What initially seemed like a navigational curiosity took a strange turn when metallurgists determined the disc had been cast with a unique blend of magnetite and iron that retained magnetic polarity far beyond the lifespan of natural lodestone. Upon laboratory restoration, the disc was revealed to be calibrated along precise cardinal directions with inlaid markings representing not just north, south, east, and west, but subtle gradations consistent with modern azimuthal charts. Its most unusual feature was a series of tiny indentations forming a spiral pattern only visible under raking light. When reconstructed and mounted, the pointer, even in its damaged state, began aligning steadily toward magnetic south. This behavior matched descriptions from ancient Chinese texts that spoke of a south-facing spoon used in navigation. But until this discovery, such references were believed to be symbolic or ceremonial. Historical records from the Warring States period mention a Jinan zhen, a directional instrument used during military campaigns. However, no surviving physical examples have been verified. The recovered disc, radiocarbon dated to approximately 200 BCE, appeared to fulfill that role with practical functionality. Tests revealed that even in open water conditions simulated in modern tanks, the pointer maintained alignment with magnetic fields. It could guide ships along the coast without reliance on solar positioning or landmarks. Yet the disc's capabilities did not end there. Embedded within its edge was a sequence of angular notches that matched the declination of Earth's magnetic field as it would have appeared at the time of its creation. This suggests its designers not only understood magnetism, but were tracking its geographic variability over time. The implication was extraordinary. Magnetic declination mapping is a concept not fully developed until the 16th century. Following the disk's analysis, it was quietly transferred to the archives of a national museum and classified as cultural heritage of high sensitivity. Access was limited, and foreign researchers were denied requests for replication studies. No public exhibition followed. Scholarly references to the disk ceased after 1962. An internal report from the archaeology team surfaced years later, indicating they had found similar fragments at other riverine sites, but these were reburied and left undocumented by state order. If this artifact truly served as a functioning compass with adjustments for magnetic drift, it predates the European compass by over a millennium and redefines the timeline of technological navigation. The idea that Chinese mariners crossed vast waters using such instruments gains new weight. It also raises an unsettling question. Who first noticed the Earth had a magnetic heartbeat that could be measured and followed? And why, once found, did that knowledge slip so quickly beneath the surface again? Top 4. The Greek Gravity Calibrator. In 1901, on a remote hillside outside the ruins of ancient Epidaurus in southern Greece, a team of local farmers unearthed a marble slab unlike any other found in the region. It appeared ordinary at first glance, but carved into its surface was a grid of grooves forming a precise matrix. At the center of the slab stood a short vertical post with remnants of iron rings embedded at different elevations. When archaeologists arrived, they initially assumed the structure was part of a sundial or a ritual altar, but a closer examination revealed a different purpose. The post's alignment was too precise to be religious. It pointed directly toward the local gravitational vertical confirmed by laser instruments brought decades later. What made the site remarkable was not its symmetry, but what was found nearby. A collection of polished stone spheres, each of identical volume, but different mass. When suspended from the central post using cords of equal length, the spheres produced subtly different angles of deflection, depending on where they were placed along the grid. The device functioned as a comparator. It measured the variance in local gravitational pull by observing how each weight reacted to minute differences in slope and orientation. Geophysicists from the University of Athens studied the site in the 1980s and confirmed that the instrument could detect gravitational anomalies within a margin of 0 to 0.05 newtons. The surrounding landscape, as it turned out, included a significant underground fault line and a cluster of magnetic ore deposits. The ancient calibrator, whether by accident or design, had been built directly atop this intersection. It allowed its users to map the subtle tug of the Earth's mass on different materials. Such measurements would require not just observation, but a mathematical understanding of force, torque, and mass distribution. The Greeks had long been credited with rudimentary physics through figures like Archimedes, but this device suggested something deeper. It implied practical experimentation with gravitational behavior centuries before Newtonian theory. In a 1993 conference, a physicist presented a model of the calibrator as a teaching device, suggesting it may have been used in early academic settings. Within a year, the site was declared off-limits to visitors under the pretext of preserving nearby mosaics. Funding for continued excavation was pulled. The marble slab was moved to a museum storeroom and never displayed publicly. Scholars who had published early analyses of the structure stopped referencing it in future work. No mention of such a device exists in ancient texts, yet its design bears unmistakable intention. It was built not to worship, but to observe, not to symbolize, but to measure. And in its silence lies a knowledge of weight, motion, and force far ahead of its time. Someone once stood on that hillside watching a stone sway against a grid, learning how the Earth pulled and where its pull grew weaker. Top 5. The Magnetic Stone Circle of Northumberland. Our investigation continues with mysterious structures that seem to interact with the very forces of the Earth and the flow of time itself. The Magnetic Stone Circle of Northumberland. In 1977, a group of geophysicists surveying magnetic anomalies in northern England stumbled upon a peculiar stone formation buried beneath layers of moss and soil. Located in an isolated valley near the village of Elston, the structure formed a near-perfect circle of upright stones, each roughly 2 meters tall. At first glance, it resembled the many Neolithic henges scattered across Britain, but this circle had never been recorded, and the instruments the team carried began malfunctioning the moment they stepped inside its perimeter. Compass needles spun erratically. Magnetometers showed fluctuating readings every few seconds. Even analog watches began to slow down or stop entirely when placed on the central stone. Suspecting a natural cause, the team conducted core samples and discovered something unexpected. Each stone contained significant traces of magnetite and hematite, oriented in a way that focused local magnetic flux inward toward the center of the circle. This was no random deposit of stone. The material had been sourced from miles away from quarries known to contain high concentrations of magnetic minerals. Further analysis revealed that the stones had been positioned to match the local magnetic declination as it would have appeared around 2500 BCE. In other words, the builders had aligned the structure not with the stars or solstices, but with the invisible magnetic field of the Earth itself. No tools or text from that era suggest such knowledge existed, yet the precision of the alignment left little room for coincidence. Acoustic tests revealed that certain tones, when played within the circle, produced standing waves that seemed to interact with the magnetic distortion. One researcher experienced vertigo and nausea after just 15 minutes inside the formation. Others reported brief auditory hallucinations or disorientation. A controlled experiment with laboratory rats showed elevated stress responses when confined within the field, even with no visible stimuli. When the discovery was published in a scientific journal the following year, the response was swift. The site was closed to further study by the Department of the Environment. Access was prohibited under the designation of Archaeological Protection Zone, and all magnetic equipment used at the site was confiscated for calibration review. The original report was later removed from digital archives, and subsequent references to the circle were quietly omitted from archaeological surveys of the region. What purpose did such a structure serve? Was it an ancient observatory of Earth's magnetic behavior, or a space deliberately engineered to interact with biological perception? The notion that Neolithic cultures could detect and manipulate geomagnetic fields is considered implausible by modern standards. Yet the evidence rests in stone, cold, aligned and humming faintly with invisible force. If our ancestors knew how to feel the pulse of the Earth itself, then the line between ritual and science may be far more blurred than history has ever allowed. Top 6. The Harappan Water Clock. In 1926, during excavations at the Indus Valley site of Lothal in present-day Gujarat, India, archaeologists uncovered a rectangular chamber carved into the stone floor of what was believed to be an administrative complex. Within this chamber sat a series of polished ceramic bowls arranged in a strict linear pattern and positioned beneath a narrow channel that allowed water to drip at a steady rate. While initially cataloged as ritual containers, the geometry of the setup raised questions. Each bowl had a tiny hole at its base, precisely centered and uniform in diameter. When tested with controlled water flow, the bowls filled and emptied in perfectly timed intervals. Researchers soon realized that the setup functioned as a clepsydra, a water clock predating similar devices from Egypt or Babylon by several centuries. But this was not merely a timekeeping tool. Etched onto the inside walls of the chamber were calibrated grooves that aligned with the water level in the bowls at various times of day and night. These markers matched divisions of time consistent with a 24-hour cycle, suggesting an advanced understanding of diurnal motion. Further evidence emerged from nearby seals and tablets, bearing symbols interpreted as numerical markers. The spacing between the bowls allowed for cascading overflow, meaning one bowl's completion would trigger the next, creating a continuous, passive timing mechanism. In practice, the device could have measured time across multiple hours without supervision. Modern engineers estimated the clock's timing deviation at less than 1 minute per hour, an astonishing level of accuracy for a system based solely on gravity and fluid dynamics. What stunned researchers even more was the integration of the device within the building's architecture. Stone channels connected the water clock to an underground reservoir, ensuring consistent pressure and temperature. Seasonal calibration was apparently built into the depth of the bowl placements. As the sun's angle changed over the months, shadows cast on the chamber wall intersected the etched grooves at different points, allowing visual synchronization with solar time. Despite the significance of the find, little mention was made in global archaeological discourse. The bowls were relocated to a museum archive with no formal exhibit, and the chamber was later filled with concrete during site stabilization efforts. A detailed analysis submitted to a British academic journal was rejected for lacking sufficient comparative context. Subsequent attempts to model the device digitally were quietly shelved, and references to the structure in official Lothal site brochures were removed by the late 1990s. If the Harappan civilization developed and used such timekeeping devices, it repositions their society as not only literate and urbanized, but chronologically precise. The presence of time as a measured quantity embedded into daily operations suggests complex scheduling, coordination of labor, and astronomical awareness. This was not a shrine. It was a machine that counted the hours with water, stone, and silence. And as each drop fell, it marked a civilization not only alive, but ahead of time. Top 7. The Incan Shadow Tracker. In the high mountains of the Americas and the ancient sands of Mesopotamia, we find tools designed for absolute accuracy, the Incan Shadow Tracker. In 1961, a team of Peruvian surveyors working in the highlands near Ollantaytambo stumbled upon a peculiar series of stone pillars arranged along a narrow mountain ridge. At first glance, they seemed like typical remnants of Incan ceremonial architecture. But one of the structures stood out, a tall monolith carved with a series of horizontal lines along its eastern face and angled precisely toward the horizon. When sunlight passed through the surrounding peaks at dawn and dusk, shadows would fall along the grooves in a highly consistent pattern. Over the next several months, researchers from the National University of San Marcos observed the site during equinoxes and solstices. What they discovered stunned them. The shadow positions correlated exactly with known solar positions throughout the year. But more remarkably, the markings also tracked the heliacal rising of key stars in the southern hemisphere, including Sirius and Canopus, often to within a single day of their actual appearance in the pre-dawn sky. This monolith functioned not only as a solar calendar, but as a combined solar-stellar tracking system. It aligned with the Incan Psyche system, a network of invisible lines radiating from Cusco used to organize shrines, agricultural sites, and timekeeping. The stone's angle and elevation allowed it to function year-round, even during overcast mornings, using diffuse light to cast measurable shadow gradients along its face. Nearby ruins included a sunken plaza with drainage channels and ceremonial platforms, suggesting the entire complex may have functioned as a temporal observatory. One feature, a smooth stone bench directly in line with the monolith's base, was found to warm slightly earlier than surrounding rocks at dawn during solstices. Infrared measurements revealed that it absorbed and re-emitted heat in alignment with solar events, perhaps serving as a thermal cue for ritual or agricultural timing. The discovery was formally documented in a series of academic papers throughout the 1970s. However, after the publication of a 1978 article linking the site to pre-Columbian stellar navigation systems, access to the ridge was restricted by the Peruvian Ministry of Culture, citing preservation concerns. In the decades since, satellite imagery has shown that new trails were cut through the area, possibly by construction crews working on unrelated infrastructure projects. The original shadow tracking monolith now lies partially obscured by debris and has not been publicly displayed or studied since. If the Incas designed this structure to track both solar and stellar movements with such accuracy, it suggests a far deeper understanding of celestial mechanics than previously recognized. Without telescopes or written star charts, they created a functional calendar carved in stone, readable only through shadow and patience. And yet it was not left atop a sacred mountain or sealed in gold. It stood openly on a ridge watching the sky, counting days and stars with lines only the sun could read. Top 8. The Mesopotamian Standard. Rod, in 1910, German archaeologists working at the ancient city of uncovered a sealed chamber beneath what had once been the administrative quarter of the temple complex. Inside, among tablets and ledgers recording grain inventories and labor quotas, they discovered a single rod of bronze resting in a sandstone cradle. The rod was 50.8 centimeters long, smooth along its entire length, and bore no inscriptions except for two tiny inlaid triangles on either end. At first, it was assumed to be a ceremonial staff or symbolic object, But further analysis revealed something far stranger. When exposed to varying temperatures, the rod maintained its length with virtually no thermal expansion. Metallurgists later determined that it was composed of an alloy containing tin, copper, and trace amounts of arsenic, a combination that yielded an unusually stable molecular structure. This allowed the rod to resist warping across a range of environmental conditions, a property not replicated until the development of modern Invar alloys in the 20th century. Researchers began to speculate about its purpose. When compared to measuring units recorded on nearby cuneiform tablets, the rod corresponded almost exactly to what the Sumerians called a kuz, a standardized unit of length used in construction and land surveying. But this standardization appeared far more rigorous than previously thought. The markings and ledgers showed measurements recorded to sub-millimeter accuracy. Some entries even mentioned corrections for slope and curvature over large distances. This level of precision in a Bronze Age society posed a dilemma. Without optical instruments or mathematical modeling, how could surveyors in Ur produce architectural layouts with tolerances that rivaled early industrial standards? Some theorists proposed that the rod had been part of a larger set of tools, possibly including plumb lines, calibrated strings, or leveling frames now lost to time. After its recovery, the rod was sent to Berlin for preservation and study. During World War II, the museum that housed it was bombed and the object was believed destroyed. Decades later, however, a similar rod appeared in an unmarked crate during a cataloging effort at a separate archive in Dresden. Its measurements and composition matched the original, but no documentation existed to verify its identity. The crate was subsequently sealed and its contents reclassified under restricted access. If this was indeed a Mesopotamian reference standard, it suggests a centralized system of measurement in a scientific culture capable of understanding and compensating for material behavior under environmental stress. This was not mere approximation, it was metrology, the science of measurement developed thousands of years before it was believed to exist. Not as an abstraction, not as a ritual, but as a physical rule, a rod of fixed truth in a shifting world, forgotten, buried, and nearly erased. It may be the earliest surviving whisper of something we now call precision. Top 9. The Mayan astronomical grid. Finally, we look at complex grids and chambers that suggest a mastery over the heavens and the unseen power of sound. The Mayan astronomical grid. In 1933, during an aerial survey of the Guatemalan highlands, a cartographer working with a British expedition noticed a pattern etched into a plateau outside the ancient site of Washaktun. At ground level, the markings were nearly imperceptible, lost among overgrowth and fractured limestone. But from the air, the pattern resolved into a geometric grid of stone markers arranged in a sweeping arc that stretched nearly 200 millimeters across the plateau's edge. When archaeologists cleared the site, they uncovered a sequence of aligned stone columns, each less than a meter tall, positioned with startling uniformity. The intervals between them were not arbitrary. They matched angular separations between key positions of Venus along its synodic cycle, a complex 584-day pattern that the Maya had tracked with obsessive precision. Each column cast a shadow that landed on specific marker stones only at certain times of the year, especially during dawn appearances of Venus and its disappearance behind the sun. What stunned researchers was how tightly the grid correlated with astronomical data. The columns were not merely sunrise indicators. They tracked Venus's azimuthal rise and set positions, incorporating its periodic retrograde motion and brightness fluctuations. The site essentially functioned as a Venusian observatory centuries before the invention of lenses or telescopic instruments. Maya codices previously dismissed as symbolic were re-examined in light of the grid's discovery. The Dresden Codex, for instance, contained tables tracking Venus with accuracy to within a day over multi-year periods. The Uaxactun grid proved that these records were not theoretical. They were tied to direct repeated measurement. Shadow angles on the platform matched eclipse cycle data and informed the timing of rituals and agricultural decisions. Physicists who visited the site in the 1970s conducted angular analysis using high-resolution instruments. Their findings confirmed that the grid's outermost markers compensated for the planet's apparent shift due to atmospheric refraction, a phenomenon even modern stargazers must correct for. The implications were unsettling. The builders had not only charted celestial bodies, but understood and corrected for the distortions caused by Earth's own atmosphere. Shortly after these findings were published, the site was abruptly closed for environmental protection and later suffered heavy damage from illegal excavation and looting. Satellite imagery from the 1990s revealed that sections of the plateau had been cleared for infrastructure development, erasing portions of the grid. Today, only partial documentation of its layout survives, and most of the original stones are either displaced or missing. If this grid truly functioned as a precision observatory without optics, it shatters assumptions about the limitations of pre-Columbian science. The Maya were not speculating about the heavens. They were measuring it year after year, century after century, with fixed stones and shifting skies. And in that motion, they found rhythm. Not myth, not metaphor, but data written in shadow and stone before timepieces and telescopes could catch up. Top 10. The Nabatean Echo Chamber. In 1998, a joint team of Jordanian and Italian archaeologists exploring an uncharted canyon system near Petra stumbled upon a rock-cut chamber sealed behind a natural landslide. Its exterior showed minimal markings, but once inside, the team encountered a precisely hewn oval-shaped room carved directly into the sandstone, with walls polished to an unusual smoothness. What drew immediate attention, however, was not the structure's geometry, but its acoustics. When one of the team members spoke aloud, the echo returned not after a delay, but as a low-frequency hum, as if the walls themselves were vibrating in response. Initial audio tests revealed that certain frequencies, especially those matching the lower registers of the human voice, resonated across the chamber in standing waves. A whispered phrase at one end became a clear murmur at the other. Even more bizarre, footsteps near the center triggered an audible pulse that repeated at regular intervals, gradually decaying like sonar. Audio engineers later concluded that the room had been deliberately shaped to amplify and modulate sound in predictable patterns, concentrating acoustic energy toward two focal points carved into the opposing walls. Stone fragments at the entrance bore Nabatean inscriptions, suggesting the chamber had once been called the Breath House. Local Bedouins avoided the area, referring to it as the place where voices come back wrong. No religious iconography was found inside, no altars or symbols, only a shallow basin carved into the floor with a drainage channel leading to a deeper subterranean shaft. When geophysicists mapped the surrounding rock layers, they discovered that the canyon sat atop a dense cluster of magnetite and iron-rich deposits. These minerals created subtle magnetic fluctuations that, when combined with the chamber's acoustics, may have affected human perception. Several visitors reported momentary vertigo, sensory distortion, and in one case, temporary loss of directional awareness after extended time inside. Curiously, the chamber's shape bore strong resemblance to modern anechoic designs used in sonar calibration and acoustic research. Its structure eliminated external noise while reinforcing internal resonance. Whether this was the result of empirical design or an inherited architectural tradition remains unknown. Shortly after its acoustic properties became public, the chamber was sealed off by the Jordanian Department of Antiquities for safety reasons. Access was prohibited indefinitely, and the published findings were pulled from official websites. Some of the acoustic equipment used during the study was confiscated for undisclosed reasons. To this day, no academic institution has been granted permission to re-enter or replicate the experiments. If the Nabateans built this structure intentionally, they may have been experimenting with sound in ways we still struggle to understand. Whether for communication, healing, or modulation, the chamber served a purpose far beyond ceremony. It measured echoes. It shaped silence. And in doing so, it may have captured the invisible, not in light or stone, but in vibration, frequency, and resonance that modern science is only beginning to quantify. Reflecting on these discoveries reveals a startling truth about the history we think we know. These 10 ancient devices do not represent isolated curiosities or exaggerated legends. They reveal a disturbing pattern, a consistent thread of extraordinary precision in cultures long believed to be primitive. This is not a scattered collection of strange anomalies. It is a global tapestry of measurement systems that defy our historical expectations. Each artifact, whether carved in stone or forged in metal, demonstrates an intentional mastery over natural forces, gravity, time, magnetism, astronomy, with a level of accuracy that rivaled or surpassed what the modern world achieved until recent centuries. These were not rituals disguised as science. They were scientific instruments misclassified as myths. The suppression and disappearance of these devices from mainstream awareness is not a coincidence. Reports lost, sites closed, objects reclassified or reburied. Across cultures and centuries, a pattern of silence follows every discovery that suggests our ancestors may have known more than we allow. Academic institutions labeled them outliers. Museums stored them in basements. Governments restricted access under the veil of preservation. And yet the questions remain. What could have happened if this knowledge had been preserved? If the lunar obelisk had shaped our understanding of timekeeping? If the magnetic stone circles had informed our grasp of geomagnetic health? If the Harappan water clocks had inspired modern hydrodynamics? In every case, we did not just lose objects. We lost opportunities to think differently, to learn faster, to evolve sooner. And what if this suppression is not merely accidental? What if we are still surrounded by mechanisms of omission? The technologies that could change our trajectory might still exist, buried, forgotten, or quietly locked away. Those who try to speak up are dismissed. Those who ask too loudly are ignored. Those who try to measure too deeply are told they are mistaken. The tragedy is not that these tools were created. The tragedy is that they were hidden, because to admit their existence is to rewrite our assumptions about human potential. The question is no longer whether such precision existed. The question is why we were never meant to find it. If these stories of lost precision and hidden history have changed the way you view our ancestors, please subscribe and like the channel. We are dedicated to uncovering the history they tried to bury. Help us plant the seeds of the future by understanding our true past. The next treasure from the archives of time will be revealed soon.